When we think of ancient religion, we imagine temples, priests, sacred texts, rituals, chants, gods, and myths. In our minds, religion is inseparable from architecture, authority, and doctrine. But what if the earliest urban civilization of South Asia did not look like that at all? What if the people of the Indus, the Sindhu Valley, lived with meaning, order, and shared values, without temples, without scriptures, and without a priest-led religious system? This is not an attack on belief. Pause. This is a question of history. So ask yourself, did the Indus Valley Civilization have religion? Or did it have something entirely different? The Indus world in context. Between roughly 3300 and 1900 BCE, something remarkable happened in the Indus Basin. Not slowly, not accidentally. A dense network of towns and cities emerged, spread across hundreds of miles. This was one of the largest urban experiments of the ancient world. And it didn't look the way we expect ancient civilizations to look. Naming the cities: Harappa, Mohenjo-daro, Dholavira. These were not isolated centers. They were part of a connected system. Trade moved between them. Standards were shared. Designs repeated with precision. This wasn't chaos. This was coordination. So what kind of society creates this level of order? Without kings carved in stone or gods dominating the skyline. What strikes archaeologists first is not art. It is planning. Straight streets laid out in grids. Homes aligned with mathematical care. Drainage channels running beneath the city. Clean, covered, and deliberate. Every brick followed the same proportions. Every street followed the same logic. This level of standardization demands rules, agreement, shared values, but not necessarily religion. Look at what they chose to build: public baths, wells, granaries, infrastructure that served everyone. What you don't see is just as important. No towering temples, no massive sanctuaries, no monumental shrines dominating the city center. Other ancient civilizations built gods in stone. The Indus people built systems. Why? This was not a primitive society driven by fear of the unknown. It was not disorganized. It was not irrational. It was methodical, civic-minded, quietly sophisticated, which forces us to confront an uncomfortable thought. What if religion was not the organizing principle of Indus society? What if something else held it together? The central question here is the puzzle. After more than 100 years of excavation, after thousands of artifacts, seals, and structures, historians still cannot point to a clear temple system, a priestly class, or a dominant religious institution. And that leads to the question that refuses to disappear. If this was not a temple-centered civilization, then what kind of civilization was it? To answer that, we need to look not at what we expect to find, but at what is actually there, and more importantly, at what is missing. Before we go any further, let me be clear about what this video is and what it is not. This is not belief versus disbelief. This is not tradition versus modernity. This is evidence versus assumption. In this video, I will make 3 carefully grounded arguments. First, the people of the Indus Valley clearly practice shared civic and ritual behaviors, but there is no clear material evidence of a religion built around temples, a priestly hierarchy, or institutional sacred authority. Second, the seals and figurines, so often cited as proof of continuity with later Hindu gods, are not confirmations. They are interpretations, and those interpretations remain debated, contested, and unresolved. Third, the claim that the Indus civilization directly practiced what is today described as Sanatana Dharma is not a proven historical fact. It is a modern reconstruction, built by reading later religious frameworks, back into much earlier archaeological remains. These are not opinions. They are questions grounded in archaeology. So now, let's do what history demands. Not speculate, not defend, but examine the evidence. A practical and civic civilization. The cities of the Indus world reveal something extraordinary. Not mystery, not myth, discipline. Every house was connected to a drainage system. Not a few, not the elite, Every house. Wastewater flowed through covered channels. Engineered, planned, and maintained. Public wells. Private wells. Carefully placed. Carefully built. This is not accidental design. This is intentional living. And then there's Mohenjo-daro's Great Bath. A massive, waterproof structure, sealed with precision, built to last. Its construction demanded planning, coordination of labor, and long-term civic responsibility. This tells us something important. The Indus people invested enormous effort, not into monuments to power, but into infrastructure for everyone. Their visible priorities were clear: sanitation, order, and shared civic life. Yes, ritual bathing may have taken place here, but ritual alone does not create religion. Religion leaves signatures, temples, altars, priestly control. What dominates the Indus archaeological record is not sacred authority. It is urban intelligence. And that forces a deeper question. What kind of civilization chooses systems over shrines? Where are the temples and priests? When archaeologists study ancient religions elsewhere, they begin to notice patterns. Large temples, built to dominate the landscape. Clear sanctuaries, spaces set apart from daily life. Altars, priestly residences, ritual objects grouped in controlled locations. Religion, in material form, usually announces itself. Now, look at the Indus civilization. Those patterns are missing. There are no monumental temples, comparable to later Hindu shrines, or to the towering sanctuaries of Mesopotamia and Egypt. No unmistakable priestly quarters. No clearly defined ritual centers, directing or controlling religious life. This silence is striking. Yes, a few small structures have been proposed as shrines, but those interpretations remain debated, uncertain, and contested, and this absence matters. It does not mean the Indus people were atheists. History does not make claims that easily, but it does mean something very specific. We cannot confidently claim the presence of a formal, institutional religion, at least not in the way we understand religion today. And that leaves us with an uncomfortable thought. If there were no temples to command reverence, and no priests to enforce belief, then what held this civilization together? Seals and figurines, evidence or assumption. Much of what people believe about Indus religion rests on very small things. Not temples, not texts, but artifacts. The most famous is the so-called Pashupati seal, often described as a proto-Shiva figure. Others include terracotta female figurines, frequently labeled as mother goddesses. And this is where the problem begins. These labels are not facts. They are interpretations. Early archaeologists, working in the early 20th century, made bold identifications based on resemblance, analogy, and assumption. Modern scholarship is far more cautious. The seated figure on the seal could represent authority, meditation, symbolism, or something we no longer recognize at all. The figurines could represent fertility, domestic ritual, household symbolism, children's toys, or simple artistic expression, without readable texts, without inscriptions explaining meaning. We are guessing, educated guesses, but guesses nonetheless. And this is the critical point. Equating these images directly with later Hindu deities is speculative. Similarity is not continuity, and resemblance is not identity. So the question remains, are we seeing ancient belief or modern expectation? The silence of the script. One of the greatest obstacles to understanding Indus belief is not what we have found, but what we cannot read. The Indus people left behind hundreds of inscriptions, short, carefully carved, repeated across seals and objects, and yet they remain silent. The script is undeciphered, and that silence changes everything. Without decipherment, we have no access to myths, prayers, ritual instructions, priestly titles, or sacred narratives. Later religious traditions explain themselves through words. The Indus civilization does not. What remains is material culture, powerful, sophisticated, and deeply incomplete. It shows us how they built, how they planned, how they lived together, but it does not tell us what they believed. This forces historians to do something uncomfortable, to slow down, to admit uncertainty, to resist the urge to fill silence with certainty. Because when evidence is quiet, belief speaks the loudest, and history must learn to listen. Continuity or transformation. At the heart of Indian history lies a debate that refuses to settle. Did the Indus civilization evolve smoothly into Vedic and later Hindu traditions? Or did something break, transform, begin anew? Some scholars argue for continuity. They point to shared agricultural practices, recurring symbols, possible ritual behaviors that seem to echo across time. Threads, they say, were not cut. They were carried forward. Others disagree. They point out that many defining features of Vedic religion appear only after the Indus city's decline. The Brahmin priesthood, fire sacrifices, Sanskrit hymns, elaborate ritual hierarchies. These do not dominate the Indus record. They emerged centuries later, in a different historical context. So, what does that leave us? Here is the most responsible conclusion. Some cultural threads may continue. Memory may persist. Practices may adapt. But the system that later becomes Hinduism, with its texts, rituals, and priestly authority, was not fully formed in the Indus Age. What we are looking at is not a single unbroken line, but a long process of transformation, and that distinction changes everything. Sanatana Dharma and modern projection. Today, the phrase Sanatana Dharma is often presented as something eternal, unchanged, uninterrupted, stretching back to the dawn of civilization. Historically, this is misleading. What we now call Hinduism did not appear fully formed. It developed, slowly, unevenly, over long stretches of time, through the Vedas, the Upanishads, the epics, and the Puranas, through devotional movements, through regional practices and local traditions. It argued with itself. It reinterpreted itself. It transformed. This matters, because to claim that the Indus cities practiced the same scripture-based, priest-led, philosophically defined system is to do something very specific. It is to take ideas shaped much later and project them backwards onto much earlier evidence. But history does not move in reverse. Archaeology does not confirm belief. It records remains. And when we confuse continuity with certainty, we stop studying the past and start rewriting it. What the Indus civilization actually shows us, when we step back from assumptions and look only at the evidence, the Indus civilization reveals something very clear. Not rigid theology, but functional intelligence. Standardized weights point to regulated trade. Granaries suggest organized food management. Craft workshops reveal specialized labor. Urban design reflects collective planning on a massive scale. Nothing here is accidental. This was a society that thought in systems, that valued balance over spectacle, coordination over domination. It was thoughtful, measured, pragmatic. Spiritual life likely existed, as it does in every human community, but it was not visibly dominant, not carved into monuments, not enforced through architecture or administration. The Indus world does not shout belief. It quietly demonstrates order, balanced, civic-minded, and disciplined, without display. And that may be its most profound lesson. Responsible history. Early archaeologists, working with limited tools and immense curiosity, sometimes overstated connections between Indus symbols and later religious traditions. Those interpretations were understandable, but not final. Modern historians have learned a difficult lesson. Restraint matters. Archaeology can suggest possibilities. It can reveal patterns. It can raise questions. But without texts, without deciphered language, it cannot confirm theology. Good history does not rush to certainty. It allows space for doubt. It accepts ambiguity, and it resists the urge to force conclusions where evidence remains silent. Because the goal of history is not to defend belief, but to understand the past as honestly as the evidence allows. Conclusion. The Indus Valley Civilization was sophisticated, urban, and remarkably practical. It mastered cities. It organized people. It built systems that endured, but does not give us a clear archaeological blueprint for the religious systems that emerged much later in South Asia. Continuity is not impossible, but it is not proven, and history does not advance on certainty alone. The most responsible approach is to treat the Indus civilization as what it truly was, an independent, extraordinary chapter in the human story, not a preface, not a projection, a civilization worthy of being understood on its own terms. So let evidence lead belief, not the other way around. If you found this exploration meaningful, like and subscribe. Comment below. Which Indus object or mystery should we examine next? All sources will be listed in the description and pinned comment. This video is educational and based on historical research. Interpretations may vary.